Let me take you on a journey that still feels surreal every time I think about it. I'm Ethan, 33, a self-made man trying to navigate the tangled web of familial obligations and personal boundaries. Growing up, my family was the typical working-class household. My dad, 68, and mom, 65, worked tirelessly to give my sister Kate, 29, and me the best life they could. We weren't rolling in money, but we never lacked essentials, and they made sure to instill values about hard work and responsibility, or so I thought. Kate, however, was the golden child. From the start, it was clear she was special in their eyes. While I was expected to be the responsible and independent older sibling, Kate was coddled and pampered. She threw tantrums to get her way, and my parents always made excuses for her. She's just sensitive, or she'll grow out of it. Spoiler, she didn't. In her teens, Kate's entitlement grew. It started with requests for trendy clothes, escalated to a car, and later turned into demands for money to fund luxurious vacations. No matter how outrageous her requests, my parents complied. They would rationalize it by saying she needed these things to be happy, or that it's what family does. When Kate married at 21 to her equally entitled husband, Jason, 24, my parents funded their grand wedding. I protested, pointing out how they were already dipping into their savings, but they dismissed me with a simple, "Well, Kate didn't go to college, so we owe her this." Meanwhile, I had to take out loans for my own education and work part-time to make ends meet. No one handed me anything. Despite my objections, I resigned myself to this family dynamic. I figured it was my cross to bear. Over the years, I built a stable career, working tirelessly to get ahead. By the time I was in my late 20s, I was making good money and decided to start helping my parents with their living expenses. My dad had retired by then, and their pensions weren't enough to cover everything. I didn't mind. It felt like the right thing to do for the people who had raised me. To prepare for their old age, I opened a savings account specifically for their retirement. Each month, I put away a portion of my salary to ensure they would have a safety net for emergencies. I even let them access the account, but I kept an eye on it to make sure it wasn't being drained recklessly. A few months ago, everything changed. Kate called me with urgent news. She was pregnant with her third child. I congratulated her, genuinely happy for her growing family, but then she dropped a bombshell. She and Jason had been eyeing a new house, something spacious in an upscale neighborhood. The problem? It was far beyond their means. Kate insisted they needed this house for the kids. When I told her I couldn't afford to buy it for her, she got pushy. She claimed our parents thought it was a great idea and that, as her brother, it was my duty to help. I was stunned, not just by her audacity, but by the fact that my parents had entertained this idea. When I confronted them, they admitted they hadn't explicitly encouraged her, but they also hadn't shut her down. Their excuse? It's between siblings. We didn't want to interfere. That dinner conversation turned ugly. My parents argued that Kate's cramped apartment was no place to raise children and that I should step up as her older brother. They guilt-tripped me, painting a picture of my niece and nephew living in unsafe conditions. When I refused, they turned cold. It was as if I'd failed some unspoken familial obligation. I walked out of that dinner seething. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the principle. I'd spent years being the dependable one, the safety net for everyone, and this was how they repaid me? By siding with Kate's delusions of grandeur? The tension in our family was palpable after that. My parents stopped calling as often, and when they did, the conversations were clipped and awkward. I thought that was the end of it, but little did I know, the worst was yet to come. I thought I had put my foot down, but the universe had other plans for me. A few weeks after the explosive dinner, my parents invited me over again. I assumed it was an olive branch, maybe an attempt to smooth things over after the heated argument. I should have known better. As soon as I walked in, I could sense something was off. There wasn't the usual small talk or casual conversation. Instead, my mom dove straight into it. "Ethan," she said, "we need to talk about Kate's situation again. Here we go. They started with the same guilt-ridden script. She's struggling. The kids deserve a better life. And as her brother, you should want to help. I tried to stay calm, repeating what I'd said before. I couldn't and wouldn't buy her a house. But this time, they came at me harder. pulling out every emotional manipulation tactic in the book. "Do you know how hard it is for her?" my dad pressed. "Living in that cramped apartment with 3 kids? The neighbors are shady and the area isn't safe. Wouldn't you want better for your niece and nephew?" I was done playing along. "She should have thought about that before bringing more kids into the world," I snapped. "Or maybe before marrying Jason, who can't even keep a steady job. You can't expect me to fix every bad decision she makes." That hit a nerve. My mom gasped, clutching her chest like I'd physically struck her. "How can you say that about your own sister?" she cried. "Family is supposed to support each other." "Support is one thing," I shot back. "But buying her a luxury home while I sacrifice my own future? That's not support. It's insanity." The argument escalated quickly, voices raised, tempers flaring. My parents accused me of being heartless, selfish, and ungrateful. I reminded them that I'd been the one supporting them for years, covering bills and saving for their retirement. Meanwhile, Kate hadn't lifted a finger to help. Eventually, I stormed out, slamming the door behind me. I knew I was in the right, but it didn't make it any easier. The people I'd spent my life supporting were now treating me like the villain because I refused to enable Kate's entitled behavior. The real betrayal came a month later. I noticed something odd when I checked the retirement account I'd set up for my parents. It was empty. Every penny I'd carefully saved for their future was gone. Panic set in immediately. Had the account been hacked? I called my parents in a frenzy, asking if they'd lost the debit card or shared the account information with anyone. My mom was evasive at first, mumbling something about a medical emergency. When I pressed her further, she admitted she'd lent the money to her sister, my aunt, for hospital bills. That sounded plausible enough. My aunt had health issues, and although we weren't close, I couldn't fault my mom for trying to help family. But something didn't sit right. Why hadn't she told me earlier? Why the secrecy? A week later, curiosity got the better of me, and I called my aunt to check in. To my surprise, she had no idea what I was talking about. She hadn't borrowed any money from my parents and wasn't even aware of their supposed generosity. The truth hit me like a freight train. I drove straight to my parents' house, my blood boiling. When I confronted them, my mom broke down, confessing everything. They had given the money, my hard-earned savings, to Kate. "She needed it for the house," my mom sobbed. "We thought you'd understand." I was livid. "Understand what? That you stole from me? That you jeopardized your own future for her ridiculous dream?" My dad, ever the enabler, tried to justify their actions. "You refused to help her, Ethan. What were we supposed to do? Turn our backs on our own daughter?" "Yes," I shouted. "If she can't afford a house, she shouldn't buy one. And now what? How are you going to support yourselves in retirement? Did you think about that?" My dad waved me off, saying, "We have you." Those 3 words broke me. "You have me?" I repeated, incredulous. "I'm not some infinite source of money. What if I get married? What if I have kids? Did you even consider that I have my own life to plan for?" My mom sobbed harder, but I didn't care. I couldn't believe their audacity. They hadn't just betrayed me. They'd gambled away their security and my trust for Kate's pipe dream. The next day, I confronted Kate directly. She was as smug and entitled as ever. "The money's already gone," she said nonchalantly. "We made the down payment, so there's nothing you can do about it." Her indifference sent me over the edge. I told her she had no right to touch that money and demanded she return it. She refused, of course, saying it was for the kids and that I was being unreasonable. I gave my parents an ultimatum. Unless they got the money back and restored the retirement account, I would cut them off completely. No more financial support, no more help with bills or groceries. They were shocked, but I was dead serious. They needed to understand the consequences of their actions. Kate, predictably, swooped in to reassure them. "Don't worry," she said with a fake smile. "We'll take care of you if Ethan cuts you off." It was laughable. Kate and Jason could barely make ends meet, and now they were promising to support my parents? The whole thing was a joke, but my parents clung to her empty words, desperate to believe she would come through for them. I knew better. It didn't take long for reality to catch up with everyone. Kate was now the proud owner of her dream house in an upscale neighborhood. She couldn't stop flaunting it on social media, endless posts about the spacious backyard, the perfect nursery for the new baby, and how she was finally living her best life. Meanwhile, I couldn't scroll through my feed without feeling burning anger in my chest. That house wasn't just a mistake. It was built on betrayal. At first, my parents seemed thrilled with the arrangement. They gushed about how happy Kate was and how the kids finally had space to play. It was like they'd convinced themselves they'd made the right choice, ignoring the looming disaster I knew was inevitable. Sure enough, cracks began to show within months. Kate and Jason had massively overestimated their financial stability, or lack thereof. Between the mortgage, utilities, and other living expenses, the math simply wasn't adding up. They hadn't considered how much more expensive living in a better neighborhood would be. Property taxes alone were eating into their already strained budget, and with 3 kids to care for, their finances quickly spiraled out of control. Jason's job, while steady, didn't pay enough to sustain their new lifestyle. Kate, who had never been consistent with work, couldn't hold down a job long enough to make a difference. Within 6 months, they were struggling to keep their heads above water. Credit cards were maxed out, bills piled up, and the dream house was rapidly turning into a nightmare. Meanwhile, my parents were starting to feel the consequences of their decision. The small savings they'd set aside from the allowance I used to send them were drying up. They tried to stretch every dollar, but it wasn't enough. And just as I had predicted, Kate and Jason were in no position to help. At first, my parents reached out to me subtly, dropping hints about how tight things had become. My mom would say things like, "We're trying to make it work, but it's harder than we expected." My dad chimed in about how unexpected expenses were popping up. I ignored the hints, knowing exactly where they were leading. Then the requests became more direct. "Ethan," my mom said over the phone one evening, her voice hesitant, "things have been really tough lately. Can you help us out just for a little while? You know, until we get back on our feet." I felt a pang of guilt. Of course I did. These were my parents, the people who raised me, who sacrificed so much to give me a good life. But then I remembered how they'd gambled away their future and my trust for Kate's sake. I remembered the betrayal, the lies, and the way they treated me when I said no. "I'm sorry," I replied, my voice firm but not unkind. "I warned you this would happen and you chose to ignore me. I can't keep bailing you out." "But we made a mistake," my mom cried. "We thought Kate would help us." "And did she?" I interrupted. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like she left you high and dry, just like I said she would." There was silence on the other end. For the first time, my mom didn't have a defense. The weeks that followed were difficult. My parents kept trying to contact me, alternating between pleas for help and guilt, tripping me for abandoning them. I held my ground, even though it hurt. Cutting them off financially had been one of the hardest decisions of my life, but it was necessary. They needed to understand the consequences of their actions, and I needed to protect myself. Kate, predictably, disappeared from the picture as soon as things got tough. She stopped answering my parents' calls and blocked them on social media. When they went to her house to confront her, they found it locked up and empty. It turns out she had sold the house and moved out of the city without telling anyone. It was the ultimate betrayal. My parents were devastated, not just by the financial fallout, but by the realization that Kate had used them. My mom broke down in tears, apologizing over and over for not listening to me. "We thought we were doing the right thing," she said through sobs. "We just wanted to help her." "It wasn't help," I said, my voice flat. "It was enabling. And now you're paying the price." My dad tried to argue, saying it was still my responsibility to step in and take care of them. That was the final straw. "Responsibility goes both ways," I told him. "You chose to trust Kate over me. You chose to betray my trust and gamble away your future. And now you want me to clean up the mess? No, I'm done." It's been a few weeks since that conversation. I haven't heard from my parents since, and honestly, I don't know if I will. The silence feels heavy, like an unresolved tension I can't quite shake. Part of me feels guilty, but a bigger part of me knows I did the right thing. I had to set boundaries, not just for my own sanity, but to teach them that actions have consequences. As for Kate, I have no idea where she is now, and I don't care to find out. She's left a trail of chaos and destruction in her wake, And I can only hope she's finally learning what it means to face the consequences of her choices. The silence between me and my parents dragged on, and while it felt heavy at first, I slowly started to adjust to the quiet. For years, I'd been the one they leaned on, the one they expected to swoop in and solve every problem. Cutting them off, financially and emotionally, had left a void, but it also felt strangely freeing. For the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying the weight of their poor decisions. Still, I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt. There were nights I lay awake, questioning myself. Was I too harsh? Should I have handled things differently? But every time those thoughts crept in, I'd remind myself of the years of sacrifices I'd made, the trust they'd broken, and how they had repeatedly chosen Kate over me. Weeks turned into months, and I focused on my own life. I'd been dating a wonderful woman, Lily, for over 2 years, and we were finally taking steps to build a future together. We talked about moving in, saving for a wedding, and maybe even starting a family someday. For the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful about where my life was heading. But just as I was beginning to find my peace, my parents resurfaced. One evening, my phone lit up with a call from my mom. I hesitated before answering. Part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. Her voice was trembling, a mix of desperation and shame. "Ethan, we need to talk," I sighed. "About what?" "Kate," she said. "She's gone." I felt a pang of guilt for the first thought that crossed my mind. Good riddance. But I kept my voice steady. "What do you mean gone?" "She sold the house," my mom explained, her words tumbling out in a rush. "She said she'd pay us back, that she'd help with expenses, but she's disappeared. She blocked us on everything. We have no idea where she is." I leaned back in my chair, trying to process what I was hearing. This was exactly what I had warned them about. I had told them, begged them to think about the consequences of trusting Kate. And now, here we were. "What do you want me to do about it?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. My mom started to cry. "Ethan, we're so sorry. We were wrong. We should have listened to you, but we're in trouble now. We don't have anything left. Please, can you help us?" It was a moment I had dreaded and anticipated in equal measure. I'd imagined this exact scenario countless times, but hearing it out loud still felt like a gut punch. My parents were broke, abandoned by the daughter they had sacrificed everything for, and now they were crawling back to me. I stayed silent for a long moment, my mind racing. Every part of me wanted to say no, to remind them of the betrayal, to tell them this was their mess to clean up. But another part of me, the part that still loved them despite everything, couldn't shake the image of them struggling, helpless and alone. "Let me think about it," I finally said. "I need time." That week I couldn't focus on anything else. Lily noticed I was distracted and pressed me to talk about it. When I told her everything, she listened patiently, nodding at all the right moments. "You don't owe them anything," she said gently. "They made their choices. They knew the risks, and they still chose to betray you." "I know," I replied, running a hand through my hair. "But they're still my parents. I don't know if I can just walk away." She took my hand, her eyes full of compassion. "You can help them if you want to, Ethan, but only if it's what you want, not out of guilt, not because you feel obligated. It has to be your choice." Her words stuck with me. For the first time, I realized that whatever decision I made, it had to be for my own peace of mind, not theirs. A week later, I went to visit my parents. The house felt smaller than I remembered, the air heavy with tension. My mom looked older, her face lined with worry. My dad sat silently in his chair, staring at the floor. The energy in the room was suffocating. They repeated everything they'd told me over the phone, how Kate had betrayed them, how they had no money left, how they regretted what they'd done. I listened quietly, letting them get it all out. When they finished, I leaned forward, clasping my hands together. "I warned you this would happen," I said, my voice steady but firm. "I tried to protect you, but you chose to ignore me. You gambled everything on Kate, and now you're dealing with the consequences." My dad bristled, his pride flaring up. "You're our son," he snapped. "It's your responsibility to help us." "Responsibility goes both ways," I shot back. "You chose to betray my trust. You chose Kate over me, and now you're asking me to fix it? That's not how this works." They tried to argue, but I wasn't having it. I told them I couldn't bail them out this time. They had made their choice and now they had to live with it. I could see the disappointment in their eyes, but I refused to budge. This wasn't about punishment. It was about self-preservation. Before I left, my mom tried one last time to appeal to my emotions. "We're sorry, Ethan," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We didn't mean to hurt you. We just thought we were doing the right thing." I looked at her, my own heart aching. "I know you did," I said quietly, "but that doesn't change what happened." As I drove home, I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, sadness, relief. I hated seeing my parents like that, but I also knew I couldn't keep enabling them. They had to learn, just as I had, that actions have consequences. And as for Kate, she was gone, and good riddance. I didn't know where she was or what she was doing, and frankly, I didn't care. She had made her choices, and now she'd have to live with them. The days after that final conversation with my parents were quieter than I expected. No calls, no texts, just silence. It felt strange, almost unnatural, to not have them looming over my decisions, my finances, or my sense of responsibility. But it also felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in years, I wasn't the safety net holding everything together. It gave me space to think about my life, what I wanted, what I deserved. I'd spent so long putting everyone else first that I hadn't realized how much of myself I'd been neglecting. Lily helped me see that. She was patient, supportive, and always reminded me that it was okay to set boundaries, even with family. One evening, as we sat on the couch planning our move to a bigger place, I told her everything I'd been feeling. "I don't hate them," I admitted, staring at my hands. "I'm just tired. I've been carrying this burden for so long, and I think I finally dropped it." She rested her head on my shoulder. "You're allowed to rest, Ethan. You've done more for them than most people ever would. You deserve to focus on yourself now." Over the next few weeks, I heard bits and pieces about my parents through distant relatives. They were struggling, of course, scraping by with what little they had left. Kate's betrayal had left them emotionally and financially devastated, but even then they still defended her. They blamed Jason, the economy, and even themselves, but never her. It hurt to know that after everything, they still couldn't see the truth. They had enabled her for so long that they couldn't break the cycle, even when it cost them everything. But I also realized it wasn't my job to fix that. They had to figure it out on their own, just like I had to figure out my own path. As for Kate, she remained a ghost. No one in the family had heard from her since she sold the house and disappeared. I couldn't bring myself to care. She'd burned every bridge, taken what she wanted, and left a trail of chaos in her wake. Maybe one day she'd look back and realize the damage she'd done, but I wasn't holding my breath. With my parents and Kate out of the picture, I threw myself into building the life I wanted. Lily and I moved into a new apartment, a bright, spacious place where we could finally start planning our future together. We talked about everything, from wedding ideas to financial goals, and for the first time in years, I felt like my priorities were exactly where they needed to be. But even as I moved forward, a part of me couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the guilt, it was all still there, lingering like a shadow. I realized that healing wouldn't happen overnight. It would take time, patience, and a lot of forgiveness, not just for them, but for myself. One afternoon, months later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. It was my mom. Her voice was soft, hesitant, like she wasn't sure if I'd even pick up. "Hi, Ethan," she said quietly. "I just wanted to say we're sorry for everything." I didn't respond right away. Part of me wanted to hang up, but another part of me, the part that still loved her despite everything, told me to listen. "We've been thinking a lot about what you said," she continued. "You were right. About Kate, about the money, about everything. We made a huge mistake, and we hurt you. We're so sorry." Her words were genuine, but they didn't fix what had happened. They didn't undo the years of enabling, the betrayal, or the trust they'd broken. Still, it was the first time I'd heard her take responsibility, and that meant something. "I appreciate the apology," I said after a long pause. "But things aren't going to go back to the way they were. I can't keep bailing you out. You need to take care of yourselves. We understand, she said, her voice cracking. We're trying, it's just hard. I felt a pang of guilt, but I stayed firm. I hope things get better for you, I really do, but I have my own life to focus on now. She didn't argue. For the first time, she accepted my boundaries without pushing back. It wasn't much, but it was a step. After that call, I felt a strange sense of closure. The wounds were still there, but they didn't feel as raw. I'd done everything I could, and now it was up to them to figure out their own path. I wasn't angry anymore, just done. Looking back, I realized this experience taught me more than I ever wanted to learn about family, responsibility, and boundaries. It showed me that love isn't about sacrifice to the point of self-destruction. It's about respect, trust, and knowing when to say enough is enough. For years, I let myself believe that being the responsible one meant I had to fix everything, but now I see that sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself and the people you love is to let them face the consequences of their actions. It's not easy and it's not painless, but it's necessary. Because at the end of the day, you can't save someone who doesn't want to save themselves. Story 2, it's time to raise a chair. In the lounge today, we have another fantastic story for you. Can the wounds of financial greed be healed by lesbian loyalty? In the lounge today, a father is only attempting to act in his daughter's best interests, amid a society that appears all too ready to profit on his well-deserved achievement. With the help of my daughter, my wife attempted to file for divorce in order to get my money. She didn't get much for me. I am a 46-year-old guy who has been married to my 40-year-old wife for 20 years. Together, we have a 19-year-old daughter named Mary who just enrolled in college. I've always taken great satisfaction in working hard to give my family a pleasant existence. We have never had to be concerned about where we would get our next meal, about missing payments, or about running out of money. I make a good living overall, and I have a little fortune saved up in a variety of assets. If we wanted to, we could live a pretty extravagant lifestyle since there's enough money there. However, I've always supported sound money management. In the first place, that's how I got so rich. I don't mean to boast. Even though we have never experienced financial difficulties, that is all I'm trying to say. I'm not saying that I'm frugal. Simply said, I handle money sensibly. However, I recognize how important it is to occasionally indulge ourselves by spending a little more. During Mary's early years, my wife stayed at home to raise Mary, and my daughter was able to attend the school of her dreams without having to worry about student debt. Both of them rationally drove their ideal vehicles. Although my wife loved her Range Rover, and my daughter was content with her BMW 3 Series, I wasn't going to purchase them a Lamborghini. I personally love taking vacations, and when we got married, we always went on a lovely family vacation once a year. For me, I was already doing well. I put the most of my discretionary income into my different assets because I had a solid career and a few obligations. When I was dating, females often assumed they were going out with a wealthy man who had money to spend on them because I didn't really communicate this with them. This resulted in several terrifying tales of materialistic women abandoning me after learning that I wasn't the kind to spend a lot of money, particularly on girlfriends. But I believed that my wife was different from other girls. I had never had the feeling that she was pursuing my money. I took her out on a first date to a modest diner, not as a test, but when I had nearly 7 figures in savings and assets. I simply adored and continue to appreciate their coffee. She also didn't grumble. I even turned down her offer to divide the payment. At that point, I believed I had discovered the uncommon woman who seeks a relationship beyond financial gain, and I moved quickly to keep dating her. After a while, we got married and had a kid. Our marriage has been going well for the most part, or so I believed. We had a lovely, intelligent daughter and led a comfortable life. I believe that Leanne's realization of my true wealth was the first factor that caused my marriage to fall apart. Her tastes changed soon after, though I'm still not sure how she found out. All of a sudden, she was requesting more lavish items. She desired pricey jewelry and designer clothing. She no longer thought our easy family vacations were sufficient. She now desired a first-class flight to a 5-star resort. I initially tried to make light of her whenever I could, But I quickly came to the conclusion that she had no boundaries on how much she was willing to spend of the funds I had been building for over half my life. One evening, I sat down with Leanne in the hopes of having an open discussion about her new costly habits. I clarified that even though we had plenty of money, we still had to exercise responsibility. I emphasized that my initial accumulation of the funds was made possible by my financial responsibility. I informed her that we could be securing a better future for Mary and ourselves instead of spending our savings on pointless items. I knew she wouldn't be happy about that, but I didn't expect her reaction. The end blew up at me. She started by calling me cheap and controlling, accusing me of being tight with my money as a form of financial abuse. She went on to complain that I had more money than anyone else she knew, but we were living like poor people. I pointed out nice cars she and my daughter drove, as well as the yearly trips, but she just scoffed, saying it was nothing compared to how we were supposed to be living. And I'm not the only one that feels like this. Mary agrees with me. Hearing Mary's name mentioned caught me off guard. I had assumed this obsession with spending money was only an issue with Leanne, but apparently she'd been feeding my daughter the same poison. Mary hadn't been talking to me as much recently, and I always thought it was just because she had moved out to college. Now, I started to believe that she might be unhappy with me because I didn't spend money the way they would both prefer. In my mind, Mary was still my little girl, and I'd worked hard to make sure she understood the value of $1 earned. Sure, I paid her tuition and bought her fancy car, but that was just to make her happy. Ever since she was old enough, I'd made sure she worked part-time in summer jobs. I taught her how to invest, what she made, and how to spend it wisely. I could have simply just handed her the money while I was attempting to prepare her for her future. It was dreadful to find out that my teachings might not have soaked in at all. After that chat, things started to worsen between Leanne and myself. There was stress in my connection with my daughter as well. She phoned me less often, and when she did call, she would seek some money to go on excursions or shopping sprees with her pals. When I tried to explain what I told her mom about handling our finances, she answered, "Well, Mom told me that was your explanation." The word excuse hurt quite deeply. I didn't want to have a rerun of the battle I'd had with her mother, but it's a dad's obligation to place his daughter in the correct path, isn't it? I attempted to explain her that it wasn't an excuse, and that was how I had built up the fortune they wanted me to spend carelessly. She wasn't having it. She went on a rant about how she had friends whose family weren't nearly as affluent as we were, yet they were living better than we were. We should be living like celebrities, like the Kardashians. I couldn't believe that I was hearing this from Mary. I felt I had raised her with enough self-worth to resist bowing to social pressure, but I'd never anticipated the pressure to come from her own mother. In the end, though, I was the one in charge of our finances, so we wouldn't spend any more or less than I chose. However, there was a significant change in our family's vitality. Although they didn't appear to mind spending the money I decided to give them, my wife and daughter both seemed to be upset with me for not caving into their requests. It is funny how that operates. After this, I believe I spent some time in denial. Even though my wife and I were beginning to have serious disagreements over money and budgeting, I was still attempting to keep our relationship intact. But since she didn't have access to the majority of my money, I told myself that I would be all right. A mobile notification on her phone served as a reality check for me. We were sitting together one day when her phone made a distinctive notification sound. I attempted to look at her screen, but I was unable to see it since she had it turned away from me. I asked her what the notice was since I thought it was strange. She declined to further, stating that it was a settings notification. After thinking about the situation for a long, I made the decision to look through her phone and see what she was concealing. After several days, I finally managed to obtain it. She had made a profile on a dating app I discovered when I browsed through her applications. However, it wasn't a Tinder-like app. It was one of those high-end dating applications designed for wealthy men. I had conflicting emotions when I understood she was over that romance. I felt somewhat relieved, but also unhappy and deceived. Similar to my failed relationship, I didn't end it. Looking through her texts on the app made me nervous. I didn't want to see evidence of her flinging herself at other guys, even though I already knew we were done. I went through the app though, since I don't think ignorance is bliss. Her bio had several half-truths, I noted. She was seeking a large spender who could keep up with her, despite the fact that she was accustomed to enjoying a high-class lifestyle. In a beneficial move, she did not mention that she was married and had a daughter. She texted a number of these individuals, but I couldn't uncover any evidence that she had slept with any of them. It made no difference. Her infidelity was evident just by the fact that she was using this dating app. From my perspective, she had betrayed me. The worst part was that according to her biography, she had recently ended a relationship with a wealthy guy who failed to treat her with the respect she deserved. Thus, she had previously investigated the relationship. Was there anything I hoped we could work out? They had just pulled everything behind the shed. I had to face her. I wanted to know where we stood because I couldn't live a lie. I approached her right away and inquired as to why she was using a dating app. She began to stutter and said that she hadn't met anybody and that she was simply interested. Although I tend to be patient, I became agitated after learning that my wife wasn't who I had assumed her to be. I yelled at her to quit pretending that I had read her remarks. I interrupted her to ask her to hold back the emotions as her voice began to shake as if she were ready to weep. She explained she was only seeking a diversion since she wasn't leading the life she deserved for me, but her voice was still trembling. I was only conversing with the men. That's all. She maintained that she hadn't cheated throughout our heated conversation. I informed her that I needed time to reflect. To get my thoughts straight, I took a drive. I knew I had to speak with Mary to see what her mother had told her. They appeared to be disclosing everything at this point. Perhaps she would confirm that her mother was over me and that our relationship was doomed, or perhaps she would tell me something that would support what her mother had said. The very following day, I made the decision to travel down and see her. I didn't want to involve my kid in a dispute between my wife and myself, but I wanted to find out what was going on. I went to see Mary in her dorm after driving down to her school. When I asked her whether she knew her mom was using a dating app for wealthy men, she didn't seem very excited to see me. She made no effort to dispute it. Is she to blame? When a wealthy guy treats us as though he is impoverished, what good is it to be with him? I'm not going to lie. Hearing that made me want to cry. You will never understand the anguish of listening to your infant speak in such a manner. She supported her mother's actions in addition to knowing what they were. So you don't mind your mother searching for males who could provide her what precisely behind my back? Her mom wanted a man who was willing to give her the lifestyle that I was supposed to, Mary replied, rolling her eyes. They both deserved more than that, she argued. And although I had the money, I wasn't prepared to give them that lifestyle. I was devastated to learn that I had brought up a daughter who saw it as an excuse for adultery. I was angry that my daughter was thinking about lantern males. I was sick and weary of the same old topic. I made one more attempt to emphasize that I had met my family's necessities and, when appropriate, a few extras. It is insufficient. We live like middle class while you have millions. She continued by describing how uncomfortable it was for her to have to ask me for pennies when her friends could purchase more opulent items. She isn't actually going to leave you just yet. She's only leaving her choices open since she believed it would be beneficial. It didn't. After then, there was little we could say. She continued to attempt to explain, but I simply got up and walked away. I was so devastated that I drove home. Both my wife and my kids seemed like total strangers to me that evening. I kept thinking about what Mary had said. Although her mother hadn't told me outright, it seemed like they had been talking about her getting half of my possessions after a divorce. Leanne was willing to discard 20 years of marriage because they were so needy for my money. However, I refused to be taken for a fool. If a divorce is imminent, I'll get ahead of it after that. A few years ago, a friend of mine had something similar, and he suggested the attorney who provided him with protection. We'll be prepared for them, but I can't discuss what we're doing at the moment. To be honest, you've raised your family really well. The fact that they appear to have misplaced financial responsibility is merely regrettable. Before Dad loses it, let's see how far we can push him. Both of them are now searching for the newest sparkling item. At least the person on the dating app isn't you, but you could always join. Until you bite, just make sure your bio says generous but responsible. Update. I felt that it was only right that I go back and provide a last update to all of the people who first invested in my tale. I realized that I haven't told my tale in a long time. It has been more than 3 years after the initial post date. In that time, a lot has occurred. Divorce was the only choice, as I mentioned previously. Unfortunately for me, when I got married, I was fairly dumb. When I was married, prenuptial agreements weren't very popular, so I had no idea how to safeguard myself. Even if I did think about it, I was certain that my wife was different. Therefore, I doubt I would have followed through. Unlike the other women, she had little interest in material possessions. What a farce. I was certain that I would not allow this lady to get half of my assets in a divorce. In order to save a respectable amount that would sustain my wife and me in retirement and leave my daughter a good legacy, I had spent the previous 20 years practicing financial restraint and discipline. In order to live like the Kardashians or any other drab celebrity they admired, my wife and daughter wanted to steal it from me. I quote, sooner burn everything personally than allow it to occur. Their goal was to extract millions from me. I would ensure that they didn't see any million at all. I was determined to safeguard as much of my possessions as possible. He had previously received assistance from a buddy who was a lawyer who specialized in protecting the assets of affluent persons. We started working right away, because a sizable amount of my fortune was derived from wise investments I made before to marriage, so those were untouchable. We concentrate our attention on the many assets I still had that I had accumulated during my marriage. Although it was unlawful to conceal assets after a divorce, he noted that there were methods to rearrange items to make them more difficult to locate. The only caveat was that we needed time for this to function. It didn't bother me. The ability to play the long game was not unique to them. My lawyer and I reorganized the majority of my assets over almost 2 years. Since what I did is at best legally ambiguous, and also because I don't feel comfortable discussing it, I won't go into too much detail. It seems like a confession of guilt that may be used against me just to submit this update. I would state, however, that it entailed shrewd financial scheming that was well above my capabilities. Stable cryptocurrency, offshore accounts, and investments that wouldn't arouse suspicions. You should understand, even if I'm simplifying a lot, to make sure this would withstand inspection, a great deal of effort was done behind the scenes. I had to keep her going, so I seemed to be kind even though I couldn't have her start the divorce process, since I had already effectively preserved the majority of my assets. Even when I started spending a little more on her and told her I had forgiven her, I knew it wouldn't be enough. I thus took advantage of her avarice as well. I gently discussed an investment I was awaiting with her over supper. I could see the dollar signs in her eyes when I told her that I would stand to make a few $1 million when it matured. Half of it may go to her if you waited for the contract to conclude before ending our divorce. The investment, of course, was a complete hoax. She was so avaricious that she didn't even care to investigate how I might be earning so much money all at once. She began inquiring about the investment without attempting to appear overly inquisitive. Thus, it worked for me. To keep her on the hook, I usually gave her evasive responses that implied it might happen weeks or months later. I continued transferring funds overseas and into cryptocurrency wallets while she eagerly awaited her enormous windfall, which never materialized. After a while, my attorney and I decided that we had transferred enough of my assets to give me a substantial amount of protection. More significantly, I was happy with what remained. It appeared that I was only marginally successful based on a cursory examination of assets that weren't hidden at the time. I wouldn't mind if my soon-to-be ex took half of it. I would still keep the most of my riches to myself, and it wasn't the huge dividends he was looking for. I informed her that the investment had, regrettably, failed. It took her a total of 2 months to serve me with divorce papers since she didn't take it well. I just said, "If this is what you want," after that. All right. I lacked the willpower to act as though I was injured. For years, we had both moved on from our relationship. I had been getting ready for the divorce, and she had just been playing along for the trip. The actual divorce was brutal. She hired a bozo lawyer because she hadn't saved much money for the divorce. We had been getting ready for years, and my lawyer was an expert in this kind of case. My present financial situation became apparent when it came time to divide up the assets. It was all worthwhile when I saw my wife and daughter's shocked expressions. I just shrugged when they gave me a glance. She eventually left with a respectable sum of money and some alimony, but nothing particularly noteworthy. I could put up with this, but I did wish I could go without paying that gold digger a cent dot compared to everything she had sought to steal from me. That was nothing. This infuriated both my kid and my ex. Leanne came over one day and insisted on speaking with me. I saw that she was wearing really nice clothes. Although I'm not very good at fashion, she was sporting a purse and jeans covered in what I assume were high-end brands. You two seem to have begun living the great life. Leanne didn't think that was humorous, I said. She yelled at me, accusing me of taking what was rightfully hers. She informed me that half of what I had created was hers when I inquired what she meant by that. Over the course of our marriage, this lady really claimed to have helped me accumulate millions of dollars, which she then intended to squander as soon as she saw I was doing above average. I had earned all of my money despite her, not because of her. I merely informed her that she had received a just share of all I had, because my financial records had been made public throughout the divorce. A buddy then informed me that Leanne is having financial difficulties. She spent the money quite rapidly, and her alimony is insufficient to sustain the lifestyle she has been imagining. She never truly mastered money management, and she began accruing debt that she would never be able to pay off. Mary had told me that she had re-entered into relationships somewhat rapidly, but none of them lasted. Mary and I have resumed our conversation, although I'm the one who is less forthcoming now. It's difficult to open up to her because I'm not sure if she truly wants to get back in touch with her father or if she's just trying to get money again. Even though she is my daughter and I will always love her, I'm still heartbroken and haven't forgiven her yet. Perhaps one day I'll be able to repair the harm I caused her, and until then, everything can return to normal. I refuse to give her any money. Even if it required playing a lengthy game, it's encouraging to learn that you were able to safeguard your financial future. Seeing the results of your meticulous preparation during the divorce must have been a relief, particularly as your ex had anticipated a considerably larger settlement. Regarding your daughter, given the situation, it's normal to be reluctant to reestablish that bond. It's a challenging situation, wishing to get back in touch, but being suspicious of her intentions. Hopefully, she will eventually be able to appreciate the ideals you attempt to inculcate in her and comprehend the effects of her mother's influence. You seem to be doing the correct thing by maintaining your limits for the time being. I quote, am wishing you well as you go on into this next phase. How would you have responded? Thank you for coming to the lounge today, and please share your thoughts in the comments section below. To ensure you don't miss our next video, please press the notification bell, like, and subscribe. Till the next occasion. Additionally, kindly return your chair to its original location. Story 3. It's time to raise a chair. In the R Lounge today, we have another fantastic story for you. When your parents believe you owe them everything, how do you respond? Because you were born and they gave up all for you to grow up? You have your house, your rules, and your lounge today. While I was abroad, my parents broke into my residence and demanded money. I cut them off financially and evicted them. I truly need some advice since I'm at my breaking point. My parents decided that my month-long absence would be the ideal time to break into my home. For the past year, my life has been a complete mess, and my parents have made it much worse. I ended things with my 10-year girlfriend at the beginning of this year. We were planning to get married in the summer, but after the holidays, I broke up with her after learning something terrible about her. The sort that has the power to completely upend your universe. Let's just say, without getting into specifics, that I couldn't handle it. Within a few days, I ended the connection. My future was torn away from me. I had a period of bitterness and total loss following the split. Outside of that connection, I had no idea who I was. The wedding date and the summer arrived. I was miserable as a result. I had hoped to spend a month amid the tranquility of nature in Michigan. However, I discovered my parents had crept in when I returned. They always kept an eye for my house, and they believed that my absence was the ideal chance to get inside. I don't come from a wealthy family, you see. Our residence was rented. To raise my sister and myself, my parents put forth a lot of effort. For all that they have done for me, I will always be thankful, but that doesn't mean they start asking for things I can't afford. One of the requirements I've been avoiding for years is purchasing a home. I quote, just be direct, since I'm not sure how to express this in a courteous manner. My parents have never been easy. They have expected me to take care of their needs and make their life simpler ever since I began earning money. They would constantly say things like, "You owe us because we sacrificed everything for you." I never confront the obvious because, well, I can't afford it. Even when they subtly suggest that I should buy them a house. I quote, "They've been working nonstop for almost 10 years. Why not buy a house first and then settle down after my ex-girlfriend and I made the decision to be married?" My folks weren't overjoyed when I told them the news. They were undoubtedly salty as a result. Their ambition of owning a home was somewhat dashed. I can't have another one for them now that I've purchased one for myself. But my house was always theirs. Since I purchased it 2 years ago, they said, "I wish our house also had this kind of kitchen, this kind of decor, or this kind of ceiling," when they first came to see me, only a week following that visit. In order to repair their home, Mom phoned me and asked for some money. Their requests perplexed me, as though they rent a home. They would renovate it, but why? The owner is responsible, right? It was about the decor, she stated. They desired some improvised ornate ceilings, furniture, and other accent pieces for the home. "I just made a big purchase," I remarked. "A loan of this magnitude is beyond my means." She makes me feel guilty by claiming that our living conditions have been subpar. "Everything in this home is rusted and ancient. We deserve new things, don't we?" I refused the request, refusing to back down. I had a motive. I informed them that I was saving money for my upcoming wedding in a year. They didn't like that I was putting my life above their self-serving needs. According to a cousin, my father told someone that I merely bought a house, saved for my marriage, and didn't care about them. You know, extended family likes to enjoy this gossip, so I didn't take it seriously. But when they learned about my split, I saw their true faces. They first hurried to comfort me, demonstrating their concern for me. I felt awful. It took me a week to get out of bed. Mom offered to remain and look after me. What a sweetheart she is. Wait a moment. She revealed the shocking information a week later. It was similar. "I am aware of your single status. The entire room is not necessary for you. We thus intended to just move in with you. If this wasn't sufficient, or perhaps you might ultimately locate a smaller space for yourself," she said. "We had always envisioned ourselves living in a home like this. Imagine going through a pitiful breakup while your parents are attempting to take over your home." They saw my success as their prosperity. They believed that I ought to share my home with them, like it was the home of a family. I picked myself up and stated I needed a small loan, but otherwise I was great. She ultimately moved out, but not before my father told me that I should leave the house to get over the split more quickly, since the memories of my girlfriend may haunt me there. I was furious about this. I ended things. My girlfriend survived, that I would be haunted by the house. Yes, I do think about her in some areas of the house. The other is the memories we created. I don't give them my house because of this. Let's fast forward to the summer. I made the decision to spend a peaceful month in Michigan in order to escape the drama and tension in my life. In order to temporarily escape the specters of my relationship and family conflict, I needed to clear my thoughts. The trip was enjoyable, but as soon as I opened the door after returning, I knew something wasn't right. I discovered that several of my belongings had been relocated, that there were filthy dishes in the sink, and that there were shoes all over the hallway. I was terrified that my house had been broken into. I am unable to. When I entered the room, I saw my mom's toiletries strewn all over the bathroom counter and my dad's clothing hanging in the closet. In my bedroom, they even displayed their wedding photo. Knowing that it was them and not a scary person in bed was a comfort. It was worse than expected. For my negligence, I despise myself. A few days before the vacation, I had a security camera put in my home. It wasn't working, I realized. The camera's battery died because I assumed I had accidentally turned off the power source. I didn't take the time to thoroughly inspect everything before I left. The tale proved to be different. "We'll figure it out." I contacted my mother right away to inquire about this. She stated she would talk about it in the evening when she was at work. Then, acting as though nothing had occurred, she went inside the home. She questioned me about the vacation and came to embrace me. I questioned them why they were in my house and blocked her. She took a long time to say this while sitting on the couch next to me. To take care of the house, we decided to move in here. You kept your return a secret from us? Your father was concerned about the length of time the house remained unoccupied. She snapped in between, and I was like, I had the camera set up and it was so simple to turn it off. It was unbelievable to me that they had turned it off on purpose so as not to disturb me while traveling. While we were having this argument, she stated, anyway, whatever, I don't want them in my house and they should leave. What do you know? I'm worn out. Is it possible for us to speak over the weekend? You must be too exhausted to sleep. The fact that she simply entered my bedroom and stated that astounded me. Your dad likes this room, by the way. You've moved your belongings to the other one and closed the door after her then? She just came in from behind the closed door when I knocked and said, I need to talk right now. Not right now. By this time I was furious. Dad then showed up a few hours later. As soon as he entered the home, he yelled at me. What made you so reckless? For the criminals to break in, you left the home. I spent a minute trying to use your dumb camera. It came off so suddenly that I almost believed he was correct. I answered, I can't be gaslighted by you people just showing up at my residence. Knowing where the camera was positioned and where the power connection was coming from allowed you to do whatever you wanted with it. That would have been unknown to a crook. And you can't be living in my house for this reason. Oh my God, you're still stuck on this, Mom exclaimed as she exited the room. In actuality, we grabbed your house for you after you left it unguarded. Express gratitude and go forward. Okay, thank you, and please leave, I said. Dad became enraged. Why are you being so impolitely? Breaking up is terrible, I know, but it's been almost 6 months. Move on. It's possible that your girlfriend is already seeing someone. You're pouting about the past right now. I claimed that this was unrelated to my split. With all my politeness and composure, I'm making this request. I appreciate you looking after my place while I'm away. I'm back now. I'm capable of managing it. When do you guys intend to depart? After exchanging shocked glances, they asked me if I was tossing them out. I'm not throwing them out, I said. I'm asking them to stop bothering me. I quote D, like to be left alone. However, I rushed right in, claiming that because I'm single, I won't need a lot of space. And since the property had 2 bedrooms, in my wounds it felt like a dagger. They moved my belongings to the other room and I barged in. I made the decision to put the matter to rest and deal with it in a new way over the weekend. I attempted to talk to them rationally when I had cooled down. I clarified that they had no right to encroach on my home and personal space. It was not warmly received by them. My father began to tell me that I had a responsibility to look after them since I was their son. My mother said that they had always prioritized me and that they had made sacrifices. They overspent on my education in order to ensure my future. They would use a memory from my early years to further guilt me whenever I attempted to explain their choice. It truly amazes me how bold they are. They had moved in without notifying me, without asking, and obviously without any plans to leave, and I just couldn't comprehend it. The worst thing? They attempt to change the situation by claiming that I'm being self-centered and that I'm fortunate to have relatives that wants to look after me following my split. They used my sadness as a pretext to take over my life and claim it as their own. How can I possibly handle this manipulation of my emotions? They are my parents. Even if I'm sure I don't want them in my home, how can I simply discard them? If I'm missing the obvious solution, don't be critical. I've got a lot on my mind. I can no longer have it. You've gone through a lot with the split, and they seem to have opted to put up a flag in your home as if they were claiming a territory rather than honoring your desire for privacy. Here's the problem though. You own this place, not them. It's time to set some boundaries without their moving in, even though they've given you the emotional equivalent of a housewarming gift, a guilt trip. I received almost 50 responses with several exclamations stating that I had received an eviction notice. I didn't want to go this far, guys, but I knew it was a possibility. Regretfully, I had no other option after my parents abandoned me. After speaking with them and attempting to persuade them for weeks, I understood that in order to get my space back, I would need to take dramatic measures. My parents didn't appear to have any immediate plans to leave, and I understood that they would probably try to emotionally exhaust me until I gave in unless they took legal action. I thus sought legal advice, and he suggested that I serve an eviction notice. I saw no other option, even though I knew that would start a firestorm. The house was no longer the only issue. It has to do with my right to establish and be respected boundaries. They lost it when I showed them the eviction notice. My mother sobbed as she told me that I was treating them like criminals, but she also gave me a look of hatred I had never seen before. They also claimed that I was ejecting my family members like strangers and accused me of deserting them. I defended my position and made it clear that I was only taking back my privacy. The days after receiving the notice of eviction were a living misery. They tried every strategy in the book, from random gaslighting to continuous guilt trips. And then my dad would suddenly start giving a sermon about his obligation to his family. He would simply cry as he talked about the times he worked 2 jobs to support my schooling. My mother would participate, sharing her experiences of raising me while working a full-time job. They exacerbated the issue to the point that I had to enter my own home carefully to avoid running into them. As if it weren't enough, they even enlisted my sister. She contacted me out of the blue to tell me that I was being too harsh and to lecture me about the value of having a family. "How can you do this to the people who raised you?" she said. I fired back at her. "What did you do? You two were reared by them. You barely ever go see them or look after them. Therefore, you have no authority to enforce morality on me." When she said, "You see, at the end of the day, it's the parents who stood with you in tough times," she didn't think twice about picking at my wound. "To ensure your girlfriend's future, you purchased a home. What did she do to you, though? You haven't learnt your lesson yet, did you?" I said, "I don't want a family that's trying to take advantage of my suffering for their own benefit," and hung up. Even my uncle, who came to see me one evening, attempted to convince me that I should look after my parents. By reminding me of all the sacrifices my parents made to raise me, he attempted to guilt-trip me. The nonsense is beyond me. On their own initiative, parents bring a kid into the world and raise them, and all of a sudden, as the child becomes older, they want the same sacrifices from them. I'm not sure how fair it is to me. It's really repulsive. They eventually departed after weeks of emotional blackmail and anguish. Despite how well I know them, I wish this was the end. They would undoubtedly return with further strategies. There are moments when I want to sell this place and disappear. Even though I don't believe in such things, there are moments when I think my problems are all related to this property. I quote, "We've never been content here." Is it really rational to feel this way? Have any of you experienced similar things? The nuclear option was unquestionably the eviction notice item. You tried everything else, though. It's very reasonable for you to want to sell it and depart. To be honest, the emotional burden associated with the house is now more important than the actual property itself. I encourage you to sell it and start again if you believe that's the best course of action. It's understandable that you would want to break off contact with the person causing all of the trouble. OP. I neglected to add one crucial aspect, and another thing has been going on for a long time. I've been providing my parents with a sizable monthly payment to help them with their costs. It's not a huge sum. Since I was making a good living, I assumed it was just a way to save a few $1,000s for them. Some commenters claim that I was too hard on my parents. I want you to know that this was not the first time they attempted to conflate ownership and assistance. They demanded to take money out of my savings account, which I had saved for the future. Just a year after I started working. As usual, I obliged with their declaration that it was an emergency. They would just overlook it rather than repaying it as they had promised. They dismissed my attempt to bring it up, stating that they will take care of it eventually. "I can't believe you're tracking these nickels and dimes when you make explosives," Mom said. By no means was I making money in explosives. I agree, it's decent, but it doesn't imply I can throw it away whenever I want. For as long as I could remember, I had been providing financial support to my parents. I felt deceived after all that transpired. I couldn't continue to stand by those who believed it was okay to take control of my life without my permission and take advantage of me when I was weak. I thus halted the payments. I just shut it off when they were staying at my house without informing them. My groceries and other utilities are already being used by them. I avoid eating in restaurants. I have an allergy to some of the substances. I make every effort to eat things that I have prepared myself. Thus, there are usually a ton of goods in my kitchen. The main thing is that when they departed, they didn't require the additional cash from their time living with me. I severed all contact with them, include the allowance each month. After all that transpired, I was foolish to believe they wouldn't disturb me. I was mistaken, boy. I heard them hammering on my door a month later. They were enraged. 1 week into the month, they demanded to know why they hadn't received the money. I could only chuckle at their entitlement at this point. They didn't send the money, therefore I said it didn't reach their account. Would you mind telling me why Mom yelled? Playing along, I also stated that I didn't want to. They were furious. I stated that I had no intention of establishing a connection with them, much less engaging in this one-sided game of entitlement. If I had the option, I would assist them, but that option was not available, right now. They attempted to guilt-trip me into making the payments again, as was to be anticipated. My mother never stopped talking about the sacrifices they had made and how hard they worked to provide for me. Blood is thicker than water, as my father used to say. After that, I was evicting my family from a residence. This is when things became heated, though. Suddenly, my dad added a fresh twist. He began to discuss how my ex-fiancé had most likely left because I was too self-centered. He even had the audacity to suggest that she may still be here if I had been more dedicated to my family and less focused on myself. I was stunned as I stood there. How could they discuss such a delicate topic in such a rude manner? They made such a nasty comment about me knowing that I had been having mental difficulties getting over this. All of the animosity I had suppressed for years suddenly came flooding out of me as something snapped. I told them everything. How they had never respected my limits or choices, and how I had felt controlled all my life. And my time as a puppet was over. I informed them that I had to live my life as I saw fit, and that they may do the same. You just know to play the victim, Mom remarked. You're left alone because of this. It's possible that you are penalizing everyone in your dating life. Before you end up dying alone in a desolate house, take care of yourself. I simply couldn't stand it any longer. I immediately requested them to go. They continued to stare at me, expecting me to retract my remarks or offer an apology, but I just left the home. I urged them to go as I stood outside the door. Cursing the end of their breath, they were forced to go. My sister continued to phone me hours later. I choose to disregard it. I was aware of the call's background. She then texted me to tell me that I need to apologize and make amends since I'm being too harsh. In essence, they want me to return to the way things were, to just continue sending money, and to believe that my parents got what they wanted. However, I am unable to. I feel free for the first time in my life. I no longer feel as though I owe someone money all the time. Without feeling bad for saying no, I can concentrate on creating the life I desire. To be honest, it feels nice. I doubt that I will ever be able to make amends with my parents. And as they say, I could come to regret cutting them off. I feel as though I'm at last living for myself and not for the approval of others. You seem to have finally established some limits that have allowed you to breathe again. That's a big step. Regarding your parents' and sisters' guilt trips, they're probably simply angry that you're no longer their punching bag for emotional support. However, you cannot continue to carry the burdens of others with you if you want to go on with your own life. Although severing familial connections is difficult, it is absolutely required. Have you ever had to sever familial ties? What took place? We appreciate your presence in the lounge today and want you to share your tales with us in the comments section. To ensure you don't miss our next video, please press the notification bell, like, and subscribe. Till the next occasion. Additionally, kindly return your chair to its original location. Story 2. It's time to raise a chair. In the lounge today, we have another fantastic story for you. Can the wounds of financial greed be healed by lesbian loyalty? In the lounge today, a father is only attempting to act in his daughter's best interests, amid a society that appears all too ready to profit on his well-deserved achievement. With the help of my daughter, my wife attempted to file for divorce in order to get my money. She didn't get much for me. I am a 46-year-old guy who has been married to my 40-year-old wife for 20 years. Together we have a 19-year-old daughter named Mary, who just enrolled in college. I've always taken great satisfaction in working hard to give my family a pleasant existence. We have never had to be concerned about where we would get our next meal, about missing payments, or about running out of money. I make a good living overall, and I have a little fortune saved up in a variety of assets. If we wanted to, we could live a pretty extravagant lifestyle since there is enough money there. However, I've always supported sound money management. In the first place, that's how I got so rich. I don't mean to boast. Even though we have never experienced financial difficulties, that is all I'm trying to say. I'm not saying that I'm frugal. Simply said, I handle money sensibly. However, I recognize how important it is to occasionally indulge ourselves by spending a little more. During Mary's early years, my wife stayed at home to raise Mary, and my daughter was able to attend the school of her dreams without having to worry about student debt. Both of them rationally drove their ideal vehicles. Although my wife loved her Range Rover, and my daughter was content with her BMW 3 Series, I wasn't going to purchase them a Lamborghini. I personally love taking vacations, and when we got married, we always went on a lovely family vacation once a year. For me, I was already doing well. I put the most of my discretionary income into my different assets because I had a solid career and a few obligations. When I was dating, females often assumed they were going out with a wealthy man who had money to spend on them because I didn't really communicate this with them. This resulted in several terrifying tales of materialistic women abandoning me after learning that I wasn't the kind to spend a lot of money, particularly on girlfriends. But I believed that my wife was different from other girls. I had never had the feeling that she was pursuing my money. I took her out on a first date to a modest diner, not as a test, but when I had nearly 7 figures in savings and assets. I simply adored and continued to appreciate their coffee. She also didn't grumble. I even turned down her offer to divide the payment. At that point, I believed I had discovered the uncommon woman who seeks a relationship beyond financial gain, and I moved quickly to keep dating her. After a while, we got married and had a kid. Our marriage has been going well for the most part, or so I believe. We had a lovely, intelligent daughter and led a comfortable life. I believe that Leanne's realization of my true wealth was the first factor that caused my marriage to fall apart. Her tastes changed soon after, though I'm still not sure how she found out. All of a sudden, she was requesting more lavish items. She desired pricey jewelry and designer clothing. She no longer thought our easy family vacations were sufficient. She now desired a first-class flight to a 5-star resort. I initially tried to make light of her whenever I could, but I quickly came to the conclusion that she had no boundaries on how much she was willing to spend of the funds. I had been building for over half my life. One evening, I sat down with Leanne in the hopes of having an open discussion about her new, costly habits. I clarified that even though we had plenty of money, we still had to exercise responsibility. I emphasized that my initial accumulation of the funds was made possible by my financial responsibility. I informed her that we could be securing a better future for Mary and ourselves instead of spending our savings on pointless items. I knew she wouldn't be happy about that, but I didn't expect her reaction. The end blew up at me. She started by calling me cheap and controlling, accusing me of being tight with my money as a form of financial abuse. She went on to complain that I had more money than anyone else she knew, but we were living like poor people. I pointed out nice cars she and my daughter drove, as well as the yearly trips, but she just scoffed, saying it was nothing compared to how we were supposed to be living. And I'm not the only one that feels like this. Mary agrees with me. Hearing Mary's name mentioned caught me off guard. I had assumed this obsession with spending money was only an issue with Leanne, but apparently she'd been feeding my daughter the same poison. Mary hadn't been talking to me as much recently, and I always thought it was just because she had moved out to college.